sitting on it. Live from the CSI Softball Complex on the campus of the College of Staten Island, CSI Sportsnet presents exclusive NCAA Division III women's softball coverage. Today's scheduled matchup, a doubleheader, features the Dolphins of the College of Staten Island taking on the Bears of St. Joseph's College of Brooklyn. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Joe Foreman, and I'm joined by Nick Durst. Nick will be bringing you all of the action live from behind home plate during the first game of today's doubleheader. That game was originally scheduled for a 1 p.m. start, but right now we're signing on to let you know, unfortunately, we are in a delay awaiting the arrival of our umpires. These games were originally scheduled for 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., and it appears that is the information the umpires received. So we're expecting to have at least one umpire, if not both, arrive at the CSI Softball Complex around approximately 2 p.m. So we're hoping to get started shortly after that. And I do see, Nick, that our camera has been moved quite a bit since I set it up, so we'll have to take care of that before the start.
We have some raucous fans here. They're ready to go for the 1 p.m. first pitch, and now they're making some noise in the stands, getting pumped up for the game. We'll get that camera fixed for you guys watching before the first pitch. But for now, no umpires, so no game.
Unfortunately so, Nick, and our fans were excited for a 1 p.m. start. Actually, a nice crowd here at the CSI Softball Complex turning out for their non-conference doubleheader against St. Joseph's College of Brooklyn. But, Nick, Dolphins have played quite a bit of softball since the last time we were on the air. I believe it's 6 games they have played. They played a doubleheader against St. Joseph's College of Long Island. That was the first pair of games the Dolphins played. CSI then took on John Jay College in a single game, a very unusual single game, as the back half of that scheduled doubleheader was rained out. The following day, the Dolphins were at Farmingdale State for a doubleheader, and then yesterday, the Dolphins returned home to play the back half of that rained-out Game 2 against John Jay. So we'll take a look back at some of those games and recap those for you as we await the start of today's action. First up was St. Joseph's College of Long Island. The Dolphins took Game 1 of that doubleheader by a final score of 7-3. It was in the third inning that the Dolphins got on the board with a Patricia Rich's 2-run homer. That gave the Dolphins a 2-0 lead at the time, but St. Joe's was able to battle back with a run in the bottom half of the third to make it 2-1. It was in the fourth that the Dolphins broke that game open and scored 3 runs. First, it was an Allison Marr double to left field scoring a run, and Antoinette Galbo single to left scored another. A third run came home on a fielder's choice, and then an error brought home another Dolphins run in the inning, or make that 3 runs total in the inning. A fielder's choice brought home the run, an error advanced the runners. So Dolphins led 5-1 after 4. St. Joe's got 2 in the bottom of the 5th to make it 5-3, but the Dolphins had scored 2 more in the 6th to make it 7-3. 15 hits in the game for the College of Staten Island on their way to a 7-3 victory in the game. Patricia Rich's was 4 for 4, drove in a couple, both coming on that home run in the third inning. Antoinette Galbo also had 2 hits in the game and 4 plate appearances. Samantha McPherson was 3 for 4, Allison Marr 2 for 4, and Christina Severizzo 2 of 3 in the game as well. So a good offensive showing for the Dolphins in Game 1 of that doubleheader against St. Joe's Long Island. However, they did drop the second game of that doubleheader 6-4. Both teams scored 3 runs in the first inning of that game. It was St. Joe's that added 3 more in the bottom of the third to go ahead 6-3. They would not look back from there. The Dolphins staged a threat in the 7th inning, did score a run, but they wouldn't get any closer than 2 beyond that point, and CSI dropped that game to St. Joe's 6-4 in the back end of that doubleheader. Big game on Monday, Nick. You have the CUNYAC standings in front of you. We'll look at those in a moment. We actually have them prepared for you on your screen, so we'll pull those up right now, as the Dolphins right now are in the number 2 spot in the CUNYAC, and it looks like that is where they will remain if they can take care of business against Lehman this coming weekend. That doubleheader at Lehman College is scheduled for, I believe, Saturday, so we'll see how rain impacts that. There is rain in the forecast tomorrow. Lehman's home field doesn't typically handle the rain very well, so we'll see if the Dolphins can get those games in against Lehman. But earlier this week on Monday, Dolphins took on John Jay College. And Nick, I believe it was 18 straight losses for the Bloodhounds entering their matchup with the Dolphins. And CSI was shocked when the Bloodhounds came into their building, or I should say their home turf here at the CSI Softball Complex, and came away with the victory. It was a 4-run 4th inning that put the Bloodhounds over CSI. At the time, the Dolphins were leading John Jay 1-0, but come the bottom of the 4th, it was a 4 spot against Allison Marr for the Bloodhounds. That put John Jay ahead 4-1 heading into the 7th inning. Top of the 7th. CSI was the road team on their home field for this game. So John Jay was due up in the bottom half of the 7th if the Dolphins were able to tie or take the lead, and the Dolphins fell just short. Trailing 4-1 entering the top of the 7th, CSI was able to score 2, but that wasn't enough. And I wasn't here to see it, but from what I was told, the pop-up that ended the game came on a tremendous play by the shortstop for the Bloodhounds, ranging back, colliding with both her left fielder and center fielder to make the catch and bring an end to the Dolphins' scoring threat. CSI played it a pair in that 7th inning on a pair of base hits as well. They stranded the bases loaded as they fell short against John Jay. And as I said, John Jay snapping an 18-game losing streak against the College of Staten Island with that victory. And I'll turn it over to you, Nick, right now, as we've seen this Dolphins team several times already this year. I know you've called a couple of games with Mike Babuski. Unfortunately, he can't join us today, but if he's able to listen at some point, a shout-out to him. Nick, what have you seen from this Dolphins team so far this year that has them right now at number 2 in the CUNYAC Conference?
Well, you start with the ace of the staff, Allison Marr. She's just been totally dominant. 7-3 on the season. You could probably argue she should have more wins than that. However, just been phenomenal on the mound, 1.40 ERA, and we've actually seen her come into the games as a pinch hitter and put the Dolphins ahead with big doubles. So overall, she's just been leading the team. We know she missed some time in the beginning of the season due to an injury. Once she came back, which kind of coincided with the Dolphins coming back up north from Florida, and you were in Florida, so you could speak to that. They really missed her, and overall, her performance, of course, with Patricia Richards just killing it at the plate, batting .553, leading the team in runs with 31, and of course, the 24 RBIs has really been carrying the team offensively. So the combination of those two players has really put the Dolphins on a winning track here and setting them up well for the CUNYAC.
Well, you mentioned Allison Marr. When I was down in Florida with the team, Marr, of course, was injured, unable to pitch during that trip, but she assumed a leadership role in that dugout, was very vocal, helping the other pitchers, Jacqueline Cateridge and Vanessa Porto, with their outings down in Florida, and she certainly played a big role for them down in Florida without having thrown a single pitch. Unfortunately, CSI came back winless from that trip, and you could argue that if they had Allison Marr, they very easily could have come away with at least 2 or 3 victories, as Cateridge and Porto were run into the ground during that trip, had to throw a lot of innings, especially Cateridge, as she started every single game for the Dolphins down in Florida and pitched very well, actually deserved far better than the 8 losses she suffered. I believe it was 8 losses, maybe 7. I think it actually was 7, as Porto did suffer a single loss down in Florida as well. But if the Dolphins had Allison Marr during that trip, the results may have been very different, but of course, that was a while ago now, and a lot has changed since CSI returned from their spring training trip. The record was 0-8 when they returned from Florida. The Dolphins now enter today's game with a 12-14 mark, as you see on your screen, 8-2 in the CUNYAC. So CSI has done a good job since returning from that trip and are playing very well. And again, on the topic of Allison Marr, she's been forced to pitch a lot of innings over the last few games, with Cateridge down with an injury. I believe it's an elbow injury limiting her right now. She swung the bat extremely well despite the injury, hitting at .341 on the season, good for 4th on the team, but has been unable to pitch as a result of that elbow injury. We'll see if the Dolphins have her come CUNY championship time. That would be a huge boost to that pitching staff, giving them 3 arms that have logged significant innings this season rather than just 2, but we'll see come next week if the Dolphins are fortunate enough to be playing in the championship, if she'll be available. But again, she's swinging a very hot bat as well, so that has been a big boost to the Dolphins.
And Joe, speaking of swinging hot bats, so we need to give some credit here to the freshman, Sierra Kaplanek, who leading the team in RBIs, 32, .354 average. I don't know if anyone before the season would have saw this coming, that she would be leading the way by a wide margin in the RBI column.
She's been fantastic for the Dolphins this season. Also has provided a lot of power. I believe it's 4 home runs now. She hit a 3-run shot against Farmingdale State, which helped the Dolphins along in their victory. I believe it was against Farmingdale State anyway. I'll have to double check that, but Dolphins won that game. I believe it was in the 4-2 victory over Farmingdale State. And I actually didn't get to that game yet, so I was taking a look down the line, going through the Dolphins' schedule. First up, as I mentioned, St. Joe's, Long Island, and then John Jay. On Tuesday was the doubleheader against Farmingdale State, and it was indeed a Sierra Kaplanik 3-run homer in that game. It came in the third inning. It was a 4-run third inning for the Dolphins, who entering the top of the third were trailing 1-0. The 4 spot in the top half of inning number 3 put the Dolphins ahead 4-1, and they would maintain the lead the rest of the way, winning that game over the Rams 4-2 in the front half of that doubleheader. But in game number 2, we saw a 10-inning affair between these two teams. It was a scoreless tie through 7. In the 8th, each team played it a run, but come the bottom of the 10th, it was the Rams picking up the victory with a 10th inning run in walk-off fashion. And I spoke about how many innings Allison Marr has logged so far over the last few games. In this doubleheader, she threw, I believe it was 16 innings. So Marr really worked hard in that doubleheader, but I spoke to head coach Stella Porto about it, and she said that Marr was actually throwing harder the more she worked. So perhaps that's an anomaly and something that she's able to do, get into rhythm with more innings. But that is certainly a lot of innings, and when you're limited in the arms department, that could be something that concerns you down the stretch.
Yeah, I was watching her warm up before the scheduled 1 p.m. start, and she was throwing absolute heat like I'd never seen before. So I believe after coming back from the injury, she still had to build her strength back up, get back in the rhythm here. But with the more repetition, just like when you're working out, the stronger she's been getting, and she's really whipping that arm and getting those pitches in there super quick.
Well, one more game since our last broadcast. That game was played against John Jay College. That game was played yesterday here at the CSI Softball Complex. And after losing to John Jay earlier in the week, the Dolphins needed a victory in this game in order to stay ahead of the Bloodhounds in the CUNYAC standings, as you see on your screen, at least in terms of losses in the loss column, to remain ahead of John Jay with a victory. And the Dolphins picked up that win over the Bloodhounds. They got on the board early, scoring a second-inning run. That came on a Claudia Porcaro single, scoring Jacqueline Cateridge, who had a big game at the plate as well. Porcaro, I believe, was 3 for 4 in the game. Cateridge also a big factor at the plate for the Dolphins as well. She was 2 for 3. Porcaro drove in 2 runs in the game and scored a run. Cateridge had a couple of base hits, as I mentioned, also scored 2 runs. But taking a look down the line in that game, Dolphins were ahead 1-0 after 2. Plated 4 more in the 4th to break the game open, 5-0 entering the 5th. John Jay didn't get on the board until the bottom of the 6th with a single run to make it 5-1. The Dolphins added some insurance in the top of the 7th to make it 7-1, and the Bloodhounds got to Allison Marr in the 7th inning, really making her work for those final 3 outs. And John Jay got as close as 3 in the 7th, but that is as close as they would get. They dropped that game yesterday 7-4. So the Dolphins ahead of John Jay in the loss column by a single game right now, as you see on your screen, tied with the Lehman College Lightning in the loss column, and Hunter College with a record of 11-1. I believe that they are finished with CUNYAC play, and they should indeed be done, as they've taken on 12 CUNYAC opponents, 6 other teams in the conference alongside them. So it looks as if Hunter is finished with CUNYAC play. The Dolphins cannot catch them, and the best CSI can do is finish as the number 2 seed in the CUNYAC playoff standings. They could drop to 3 if Lehman College deals them a pair of losses, and if Lehman did deal CSI a pair of defeats, John Jay could actually still make up the ground and surpass CSI as well. But the Dolphins are assured a spot in the CUNYAC playoffs come next weekend, and we're excited about that.
Definitely, and to keep in mind, it was very crucial to get the win against John Jay, because now the Dolphins own the tiebreaker because of run differential. So a big 7-4 win on April 24th puts the Dolphins in good shape here. Most likely looking at that 2 seed. I'd be surprised if they fell out of the top 2.
So would I, Nick. And we'll turn our attention to men's baseball now. And unfortunately, we don't have the CUNYAC standings for baseball for you up on the screen. I'll try and go find those by memory as we discuss the men's baseball team, but huge games looming for the men. And I'm going to take a look here and see what the last game you and I covered was, so we can run through the games we've covered since. And it was you and I on the air for that doubleheader against St. Joe's Brooklyn. For our viewers who didn't tune in very quickly, the Dolphins dropped both of those games by final scores of 6-1 and 6-2. The Dolphins offense really went dormant in that doubleheader. I think it was 7 total hits for CSI over that 2-game stretch against the Bears, and it was 7 hits over those 2 games. The Bears also got complete game efforts from both of their starters in that doubleheader as well, something we don't see very often. And those 2 games against the Bears followed up a pair of non-conference defeats against Mount St. Vincent and the U.S. Merchant Marines. So that made it 4 straight losses for the College of Staten Island, really not in a good position as they entered their game on Grace Hillary Breast Cancer Awareness Night against Drew University. And Nick, I'm not sure if you caught any of that game or saw the final box score. Things did not go well for the Dolphins once again, and they continued to swing cold bats as they only had 2 hits in the game. And for the 3rd consecutive game, the opposing starter gave his team a complete game effort. The Rangers defeated the Dolphins 11-1.
The weather is getting warmer, but the Dolphins' bats are getting colder. I don't know. I can't explain it right now. You have your veteran guys on this team in Navertney and Becker and Miola and DeMarco, and for some reason it just seems like they're in a bit of a funk right now. Same goes for freshman standouts Nick Falcone and Dominic Castiglione. They have the talent there, Joe, to get it done, but the bats are just cold. Overall, I would say on this season, the Dolphins' starting pitching has done a really good job, especially Esposito, who's really emerged as the ace this season. And looking at the bullpen, though, that's been another issue. So lots of things to improve here as we head into the last week of the season for the baseball team.
Well, for both you and for our viewers who didn't tune in, I'm going to fill you in on what happened during that game against the Rangers. It was Joseph DeCelie who got the start for the College of Staten Island. Labored through the first inning. He issued 3 walks, loaded the bases with Rangers, but picked up a huge strikeout of Brian Regal to escape trouble. He did not surrender a run in that first inning. In the second inning, he was relieved by Joseph Tita. Tita, much like DeCelie, labored through his first inning of work. He issued a single walk, hit a batter, and allowed a single. Tita also loaded the bases in the second inning. He struck out the most feared hitter on this Rangers team, Zach Lipschitz, swinging, or I should say looking, for the final out of the inning with the bases loaded. That actually followed up a strikeout of Cole Bosch. So Tita picked up 2 huge strikeouts with the bases loaded to escape trouble in the second. The Rangers stranded the bases loaded in each of the first 2 innings, still no score. We headed into the third inning. Tita came back out of the Dolphins' dugout for his second inning of work, and that's when the Rangers finally broke through. Tita in the inning issued 3 more walks and ultimately surrendered 2 runs. So by that point in the game, the Dolphins pitching staff had already issued 7 walks in the third inning. And for the 3rd time in the game, the Rangers stranded the bases loaded in the 3rd as well. So Drew University stranded 9 on base through the first 3 innings, and things were broken wide open come the 6th inning. Trailing 3-0, the Dolphins bullpen imploded, surrendered an 8th spot, CSI down 11-0, and they limped to the finish, went with a bunch of substitutions down the stretch, got some of their young freshmen some at-bats late in the game. They lost 11-1 on Grace Hillary Breast Cancer Awareness Night. The Dolphins only 2 hits in the game, committed 3 more errors. And Nick, how familiar is this script?
Like we said in our last broadcast together, it's just been the same story where the Dolphins, they go down early in the game in the first 3 innings, and they're automatically playing catch-up. The bats then, they're pressing because the guys are just like, we need to get something done here, and it's a pattern that keeps going and going. They're now 7 games under 500, which is not something that many would have predicted going into the season, even with the 17 freshmen on the team. And then they're playing catch-up, and they're not able to catch up. And, of course, it wouldn't be a Dolphins game this season without errors coming back to haunt the team. But, you're looking at the last game versus Drew University. If you commit more errors than you have hits, 3-2, it's very unlikely you're going to win the game. And this is a pattern we've seen over and over again this season, Joe. Errors, poor pitching, and the bats going cold.
And don't forget about the walks, Nick. The Dolphins issued 10 walks in the game. It was really unbelievable to watch. 3 hit batters as well. And in his second inning of work, Joseph Tita had already thrown 50 pitches in relief of Joseph DeCelie, the Dolphins starter. DeCelie was up at 30 pitches in his single inning of work. By the time Tita came out of the game, after his 2 complete innings in relief of DeCelie, he had thrown 66 pitches. In the game, the Dolphins took 206 pitches to retire the Rangers through through 9 innings, as the Dolphins did get an at-bat in the bottom half of the 9th where they finally scored their lone run. So CSI really struggling right now. They have dropped 5 straight games, all out of conference. But Nick, one last thing to talk about when it comes to CSI athletics. It is the huge weekend series between the Dolphins and the John Jay College Bloodhounds. CSI is playing for their CUNYAC playoff lives this weekend against John Jay. They got no help from Baruch. Bearcats took on CCNY. The only scenario that could play out, where the Dolphins would not control their own fate down the stretch would be if the Beavers took 2 out of 3 from the Bearcats. And Nick, that is exactly what happened. After Baruch won game 1 against CCNY 16-3, they went with some of their young arms in the next 2 games, and the Beavers defeated the Bearcats twice to win the season series 2-1. CCNY, if they win out, can surpass Baruch for the top spot in the CUNYAC. But if the Beavers win out, the Dolphins are done. They can't make the CUNYAC postseason. CSI will have to perform 1 game better than CCNY over each team's last 3 conference games in order for the Dolphins to make the CUNY Championship Series. So, Nick, we thought the Dolphins would find themselves controlling their own destiny down the stretch. They really turned things around very well after a poor start in the CUNYAC, but now they have their backs up against the wall with a 3-game set coming up against John Jay.
You know, before this season, you could joke around and say there's only 3 things guaranteed in life: death, taxes, and a Dolphins CUNYAC championship. This year, you know, their backs are against the wall here, Joe. It's going to be tough just to get in the game, let alone win it. And this year, no automatic qualifier for the Division III tournament anyway, with the amount of teams in the conference. So the backs are against the wall, and it's time for them to get hitting here and get pitching. You know, I expect we'll probably have Esposito be on the mound this weekend, that's for sure. So he's probably going to be the best chance to get the win there, but they really need to sweep the doubleheader for any chances here.
Well, they certainly will need to win at least 2 games. In all likelihood, they will have to win all 3 to secure a berth in that CUNY Championship Series. And you mentioned John Esposito likely getting some action for the Dolphins on the mound this coming weekend. And taking a look down the line of Dolphins pitchers, they used every pitcher on the team against Drew University with the exceptions of Salvatore Trancucci, Kevin Ryan, Christian Capion, and John Esposito. So the Dolphins using a lot of pitchers the other day against Drew University. And taking a look down the line, I mentioned Joseph DeCieli got the start. Joseph Tita came on in relief. Eric Benedetto came on in relief of Tita. Daniel Garcia came on in relief of Benedetto. Michael Lenahan was next in line, followed by Alexis Santos and Stephen Kalika. So the Dolphins went through 7 pitchers in that game against the Rangers the other day, really digging into that bullpen depth. Fortunately, they have several days off between the game against Drew and their big matchup with John Jay on Friday, 2 days off in between. So the Dolphins will have a chance for those arms to recover, and hopefully they come out strong and ready to play their best baseball of the season on Friday because, Nick, they certainly need to do so.
Absolutely, and like we mentioned in our last broadcast, we hate to say it, but the way the schedule is set up, if you lose these out-of-conference games, it's really not a huge deal. You have to win these in-conference games, though, because when it comes to the CUNYAC championship, that's really the only thing that matters. And lucky for the Dolphins, they do have conference games this weekend.
Well, that's about all there is to talk about when it comes to CSI Athletics. And, Nick, you and I will step aside here and take a break as, once again, the start of today's non-conference doubleheader between the Dolphins and the Bears has been delayed until approximately, we hope, 2:15 p.m. as we await the arrival of our umpires. Our start may be as late as 3 p.m., but Nick and I will rejoin you with the start of our games against St. Joe's Brooklyn. Nick will have the call. I may or may not return to the mic, depending on the situation come the start of today's game. But we thank you for tuning into this pregame coverage as we looked around CSI Dolphins athletics with both baseball and softball going through their stretch run toward the CUNY Championship playoffs. Of course, softball will be played in a 4-team tournament-style double elimination format. Baseball will play a 3-game series with Game 1 on Day 1 of the championship and Games 2 and 3 scheduled for the second day. The winner of the CUNY Championship will advance to take on our affiliated conference, the winner of that 3-game series, in another 3-game set with a berth to the NCAA Division III tournament on the line. So when Nick returns, he will have the call of Game 1 between the Dolphins and Bears exclusively on CSI Sportsnet at csidolphins.com.